middle power diplomacy in your view? Is that the way we should see it?
Well, it was a win for the overwhelming majority of countries in the international community, some greater powers and some lesser powers. But it simply demonstrated a point that what the Australian government had been arguing, that there should be an independent investigation into coronavirus and what's happened and how it's spread, was not surprisingly embraced by most of the world. And in the World Health Assembly, it's a one vote, one value institution. So, there's a huge majority in favour of it. And as a result of that, China had no choice but to go along with it.
My understanding is the government is now looking to cool the temperature in this relationship. Now, there'll be many critics of China who say, well, it's the slanging matches all basically come from the Chinese side. But that being said, is it time now for the government to try as best as possible just to take a bit of heat out of this thing?
Well, I think, to be fair, the Australian government hasn't put heat into it. The Australian government has been going about its business. When it said it wanted an independent investigation into coronavirus, it didn't say we want an investigation into China and China should be put in the dock and found guilty before the trial has even begun or anything like that. It's not an attack on China. And they never launched it as an attack on China. What China did was frankly quite disgraceful and beyond the pale in terms of diplomacy. However, the Australian government just needs to be calm, which it has been. I'm not critical of them. They've been very calm and just deal with matters as they arise. It certainly wouldn't be appropriate for them to go running off to the Chinese Communist Party and say, will you forgive us or whatever, because Australia has done the right thing. That's been endorsed by the overwhelming majority of the international community. And China needs to itself reconsider how well it's conducting diplomacy and what objectives it's going to achieve through this sort of warrior wolf diplomacy. I don't think it's for Australia to do anything but remain. The main thing for Australia is to remain calm, not to do anything beyond that. Just be constant and calm.
It's interesting you spoke about that wolf warrior diplomacy, because not only were you foreign minister, but you were a diplomat and high commissioner, of course. And what have you made of the language from the ambassador here? Obviously, it's language that's been, approved out of Beijing, isn't it? Is that your sense of things?
I assume so. Because their ambassadors in a range of other countries have been doing the same sort of thing, not saying precisely the same thing, but they've been incredibly aggressive and rude. Well, if I were the Chinese ambassador in Canberra, before I went to bed at night, I'd think to myself, am I achieving my objectives in this country? Am I not only understanding Australia, which a good diplomat should do, but the ultimate diplomat is somebody who can exercise some influence over the host country? Well, however are you going to exercise any influence by abusing Australia? Most recently saying that Australia's position on the independent investigation was a joke. I mean, that's not the way an ambassador that was the embassy, but he would have approved it. It's not the way an ambassador speaks. The problem for him is he's not achieving anything. He's not advancing China's interests. He's not advancing China's reputation, and he is certainly not exercising any influence whatsoever over the Australian government. So, as a former foreign minister and as a former ambassador myself, the best advice I can give to the Chinese ambassador in Canberra is that he should change his strategy almost completely. And instead of being rude and aggressive to his hosts, he should be courteous and try to understand how a liberal democracy works. You can't treat people in a liberal democracy in the same way as you can in an authoritarian society. You can't just shout at them and expect them all to obey.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, this notion of economic coercion, because it seems so counterproductive if you know the way a liberal democracy works, it just there's no government worth its salt would capitulate in the face of coercion like that. So it's hard to see the rationale behind it.
Well, they think, right, that the government will come under pressure from the public by doing what China has done with the barley trade. But let's just think this through and help the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the ambassador here to think it through. If the Australian government caved in, apologised to China and said, we have overstepped the mark and we're frightfully sorry, what do you think the reaction of the Australian public would be? And the media, would lead the cries here about an Australian government which is weak and kowtowing to foreign powers, not standing up for Australia, showing no dignity, no pride in our nation. Look, no government is going to do that. And you'd expect an ambassador and you would expect a foreign ministry to have a better understanding of the psyche, particularly of liberal democracies, than at the moment China is showing.
We're seeing some moves on this, the Chinese customs on iron ore imports. There was initial, this has happened today, and some initial concerns around that. But BHP and the Minerals Council are saying, actually, this is going to help us. So it's actually a positive, and the Trade Minister's reiterated that. It just reminds us of the complexity of this quite large economic relationship, isn't it? In a sense that we might have a bit of tension on one side, but on another, it's going fine, like on those iron ore exports, which are massive, not just for Australia, but important for China too.
Well, they're not going to cut off their noses to spite their faces, as the expression goes. I mean, if they started to disrupt iron ore exports at a critical time when their economy is just recovering from the depths of recession caused by the coronavirus crisis, where else are they going to get the iron ore from? They're going to go to Brazil, which has had to close some of its mines because of coronavirus. Where else are they going to go? They haven't got any choice. And the thing, the thing the Chinese government needs to remember is that its economic miracle, which is most impressive and most laudable, its economic miracle has partly been driven by raw materials and energy that has come from Australia. And, we're happy to supply it, and we've done well out of that as well. But it is a collaborative effort. It is, as Tim Fisher used to say, a win-win for both of us. So they're not likely to start disrupting that sort of trade. I think with barley, barley into beer, their brewers won't be happy, but they can get barley from America or somewhere else, no doubt. It's not so important as driving their steel industry.
There's a view that with the current president, Xi Jinping, that the authoritarian strain has become much more fierce. Do you agree with that sentiment? Because obviously you had a lot to do with the Chinese government of your own time in government as foreign minister. And, further to that, I'm really interested in your thoughts on whether, while a lot of people look to him and think, he's made himself president for life, in an authoritarian or dictatorship, there's still change that can happen if he's made enemies and so on. To say he's simply president for life, that rules out any possible internal move against him, which might be premature, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't think his position is in any way fragile. I think he's consolidated power very successfully in China, and for as long as, and obviously they have had this disruption caused by coronavirus, but for as long as the government is seen to be delivering for the public, they're happy to go along with him, and that's certainly been the case up until now. But dictators fall, so they have to keep the public more or less on side. They can't get the public too offside, and the Chinese leadership understand that. But in my experience, when I was the foreign minister, we dealt with Jiang Zemin and then Hu Jintao. And these were different sorts of leaders. Of course, they were dictators in effect. It was an authoritarian regime. And in that sense, it used to treat us often in a friendly way and sometimes rather arrogantly and aggressively. But they were nothing like as aggressive as the Chinese government is now under Xi Jinping. And they certainly took into account the views of the rest of the world, of the rest of the region and the rest of the world, and were much more collaborative. They campaigned to stop us getting into the East Asia Summit. We got the support of Indonesia and Japan, importantly, but some other countries. And in the end, the Chinese decided, well, it wasn't worth just holding out to keep Australia out of the East Asia Summit. I don't think if you got into that sort of situation today, the Chinese would listen to what other countries said. They have become much more aggressive and shown much less regard for the views of other countries.
So just to wrap up, though, if we look at this situation and with that assertiveness or aggression from China and the cooperation Australia has done with our allies in the World Health Assembly, but do you see that as a mechanism by which we should be looking to pursue diplomacy now in this, post-coronavirus world, but, just with China rising and continuing to rise and America unpredictable right now?
Yeah, well, America may or may not be unpredictable, but ultimately America is a country that's on our side and shares our values, whatever people may think of President Trump. I mean, he's there today and he won't be there forever. Presidents change. But the great advantage Australia has is not only is it a significant and robust country in its own right, but it has great friends and great allies. And the more China treats the rest of the world in the way they have been doing recently, the more those friends and those allies will come together. The more generous China is, the more open China is, the more difficult it is for those allies to collaborate. If China wants to peel off countries from alliances, which was their strategy for many years and probably still is, well, the worst way to do that is to start verbally attacking those countries. So I think the fact that Australia does not stand alone, that it stands with great allies like the United States, but also countries like Japan and South Korea, the UK, that we have many friends and allies around the world, should remind the Chinese that Australia counts for more than you might think by just looking at bare statistics on a piece of paper.
And the advice, to go back to where we were at the start of the interview, to the Morrison government is keep calm and
keep
calm and carry on.
Keep calm, yes, old British slogan. Keep calm and carry on. I think they've done a remarkably good job. Maurice Payne and Simon Birmingham and the Prime Minister himself have all been very calm. They haven't been rude. They haven't been aggressive. You couldn't fault them, really. It's tempting to be rude. Remember when Kevin Rudd found himself offside with the Chinese, he sort of flared up and bad language was used and so on. Well, we've seen none of that, and that's not the way to deal with other countries. It really isn't. And so just carry on, and gradually things will mend themselves.